They were Montgomery's golden couple, he, a celebrated surgeon hailed as a hero, she, a fearless detective devoted to justice. Together, they embodied everything perfect: love, success, and trust. But behind the closed doors of their sprawling estate, a secret so dark was festering, it would destroy everything in its path. One blood-stained night shattered the illusion. A woman lay dead, her lifeless body the tragic end to a love story that had captured a community's admiration. Her husband, the man sworn to save lives, was now accused of taking hers, along with running a sinister organ-harvesting empire hidden beneath his prestigious career. What drives a man to kill the woman he vowed to love forever? And what horrors lurk in the secrets we hide from those we hold closest? This case will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, love, and the dark depths of human ambition. Before we dive into this shocking case, make sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Files HQ for more chilling stories that peel back the layers of human nature's darkest corners. Dr. Andrew Langston, a celebrated surgeon known for his remarkable skill and philanthropy, has been at the center of public admiration for over a decade. The 45-year-old founded the Langston Medical Foundation in 2013, an organization that has funded free health clinics and donated millions to community health programs across Alabama. His contributions earned him accolades, including the Governor's Community Leadership Award in 2020. Behind the facade of generosity and integrity, investigators now allege Langston was running a clandestine organ harvesting operation. Sources reveal the scheme involved sourcing organs from vulnerable populations, including undocumented immigrants and the homeless, and supplying them to wealthy clients willing to pay exorbitant fees. The operation, masked under the guise of legitimate medical research, had reportedly been active for at least 5 years. Langston's wife, Detective Emily Langston, was a respected figure in law enforcement circles. At 39, she had built a reputation as a brilliant and relentless investigator, solving some of the city's most complex cases. Colleagues described her as passionate about justice and unwavering in her commitment to protect the vulnerable. The Langstons, often referred to as Montgomery's golden couple, appeared to lead a picture-perfect life. Their high-profile marriage, celebrated in local media, was seen as a union of intellect and compassion. Together, they hosted charity galas, appeared on magazine covers, and epitomized success. Yet, their lavish lifestyle masked a sinister reality. Investigators now believe Andrew Langston's double life began long before his rise to prominence. Detectives uncovered financial irregularities in the Langston Medical Foundation, pointing to off-the-books transactions linked to unauthorized medical procedures. Public perception of the couple remained overwhelmingly positive until late 2024, when rumors of trouble in their marriage began circulating. Close friends noted that Emily appeared distracted and tense in the months leading up to her death. Whether she suspected her husband's criminal activities during that time remains unclear. The unraveling of their story, marked by shocking revelations and tragedy, has left the Montgomery community grappling with betrayal and disbelief. Behind the polished reputation of Dr. Andrew Langston lay a shadowy world of deceit and exploitation. The renowned surgeon, whose charitable efforts and public persona had earned him widespread admiration, was allegedly the mastermind behind one of the most lucrative organ harvesting operations in the Southeast. Authorities now claim that Langston's involvement in illegal activities began long before the whispers of his downfall. For years, Langston's surgical skills were put to a different use, one far darker than the life-saving procedures he was celebrated for. The operation he ran targeted the most vulnerable in society, those without families, without resources, and without the means to protect themselves. Undocumented immigrants, the homeless, and those living in poverty became the prime victims of Langston's black market organ ring. Sources say these individuals were carefully selected and lured under the guise of medical treatment or financial assistance. Many never knew what was happening until it was too late. What set Langston apart from the many criminals operating in the underground organ trade was his ability to remain untouchable. He justified his actions as a necessary evil, claiming that he was saving lives by supplying organs to the wealthy elite who had the means to pay astronomical sums for them. According to sources within the medical community, Langston's skillful manipulations allowed him to perform these illegal procedures under the radar, using his position as a reputable surgeon to ensure that no one suspected the truth. However, the cracks in his operation began to show in late 2024. Emily Langston, a dedicated detective with the Montgomery Police Department, was assigned to investigate a series of suspicious deaths that had been plaguing the city. The bodies of several individuals had been found in abandoned areas, all with surgical incisions and missing organs. The cause of death in each case was undetermined, but the striking similarity in the pattern caught Emily's attention. As Emily delved deeper into the investigation, she began to uncover a chilling connection between the bodies and Andrew's medical foundation. The victims, all of whom had been previously listed as missing persons, had at some point come into contact with Langston's practice. Evidence found at the scenes, including medical supplies with Langston's name on them and traces of anesthesia linked to his surgical procedures, began to point back to her own husband. Unbeknownst to Emily, her investigation was drawing closer to the terrifying truth. Langston, already a man whose carefully constructed life had begun to unravel, noticed the increasing attention Emily was placing on the case. Sources close to the Langston household reported that Andrew became more irritable and anxious in the weeks that followed. He would leave the house for long periods, often making vague excuses, and when he returned, he was visibly distressed. The cracks in his facade were becoming too large to ignore. In an attempt to deflect suspicion, Langston reportedly tried to redirect his wife's investigation toward other suspects. He suggested the involvement of rival surgeons, fabricated evidence pointing to black market organ traffickers, and even questioned the competency of the detectives on the case. Despite his efforts, Emily remained focused, convinced that the pattern was too deliberate to be ignored. But the closer she got to uncovering the truth, the more desperate Langston became. Emily's growing suspicions, paired with Langston's increasingly erratic behavior, led her to start documenting his every move. The tension in their home reached a boiling point. Emily's friends and colleagues noticed her becoming more withdrawn, as though she were carrying an enormous weight on her shoulders. She had no idea that the man she trusted most, the man she had vowed to spend the rest of her life with, was behind the very crime she had sworn to uncover. The truth, it seemed, was far more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. Detective Emily Langston's investigation into the series of suspicious deaths had been progressing at a steady pace, but it was one pivotal moment, a breakthrough, that turned everything she knew upside down. While reviewing documents related to the victims and their connections to the Langston Medical Foundation, Emily uncovered a logbook buried in the depths of the foundation's financial records. The book was unmarked, and its pages were filled with meticulous notes and entries dating back years. What stood out were the unauthorized surgeries listed, entries detailing the removal of organs from individuals whose names were either unfamiliar or, in many cases, unknown to the public. Each entry also linked back to funds diverted from the foundation, transactions that were never recorded in official medical books or tax filings. The evidence was damning. As Emily painstakingly pieced together the connections between the logbook, the bodies she had been investigating, and Andrew's involvement, the realization hit her like a freight train. The man she had married, the man she trusted implicitly, was not just linked to the illegal operations, he was the mastermind behind them. Andrew Langston had been running an underground organ harvesting ring for years, using his medical foundation as a front to launder money and funnel resources for the illegal transplants. Emily felt a surge of nausea, disbelief flooding her as she thought of everything she had overlooked, the subtle signs, the financial discrepancies, the victims who had been discarded as expendable. The weight of the discovery crushed her. But there was no time for hesitation. She knew what she had to do next. With the logbook in hand, Emily returned home that evening, determined to confront Andrew with the truth. The house was eerily quiet, and she found him sitting in his study, lost in thought. Andrew looked up when she entered, but his expression changed immediately as he saw the logbook clutched in her hands. It was as if a cloud passed over him, his calm facade faltering for the briefest of moments. Emily wasted no time. "I know what you've been doing," she said, her voice steady but filled with a cold fury. She placed the logbook on the desk in front of him, the pages open to the incriminating entries. Andrew's face drained of color as he scanned the contents. The realization that his wife had uncovered his secret was written all over him. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them like a 1,000-pound anchor. Then Andrew spoke, his voice strained, but laced with a hint of desperation. "I did it to save lives, Emily," he said, his tone defensive, his eyes pleading for understanding. "You don't understand. The people I've helped, the wealthy clients, the families who would have lost loved ones, these people were desperate. I was doing something that needed to be done. I didn't want to do it, but I had to. It's the only way I could make it all work. I'm saving lives, Emily. I've been saving lives." His words echoed in the room, but Emily felt as though she were suffocating under their weight. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, for the voiceless victims who had no one to protect them. And now, standing in front of her was the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, defending the very actions that had led to so much pain and suffering. "No, Andrew," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You've destroyed lives. You've killed innocent people. You took advantage of the weak and the vulnerable for your own gain. This is betrayal. This isn't saving lives. This is murder." Tears welled up in her eyes as the magnitude of his betrayal became all too real. Every word she spoke felt like a knife cutting through the last vestiges of their marriage. The man who had once promised to protect her, to stand by her side, had betrayed everything they had stood for. "Emily," Andrew said, his voice cracking. "Please, you have to understand. It's bigger than both of us. I couldn't stop. I had to protect myself. If they found out, if anyone discovered what I was doing, my career, my reputation, everything would be destroyed. You think I wanted to hurt people? I didn't. But I had no choice. I didn't want to lose you." Emily shook her head, her entire body trembling with the weight of the truth. She could feel her heart breaking, piece by piece, as the reality of what her husband had done sunk in. The betrayal was too much to bear. "You already lost me the moment you started this, Andrew," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. You'll never get away with this." The air between them grew thick with tension, their lives hanging in the balance of that moment. For Emily, there was no turning back. The man she had loved was no longer the man she thought she knew. He was a stranger, someone who had taken everything she believed in and twisted it into something monstrous. With the logbook in hand, she walked toward the door, her resolve firm. She had made her decision. No matter the cost, she would expose the truth. Andrew, in that instant, was left alone with the realization that the web he had so carefully constructed was about to unravel, and there would be no escaping the consequences of his actions. The breaking point had finally arrived. The confrontation that had been brewing for weeks, with Emily Langston closing in on the horrifying truth about her husband's criminal empire, reached its violent climax that fateful evening. Emily had threatened to expose Andrew's operation, vowing to take the evidence to internal affairs, to the press, to anyone who would listen. She was no longer willing to protect him, no longer willing to overlook the monstrous reality of what he had done. Andrew, once calm and controlled, found himself spiraling into a desperate panic. His entire life, his career, his reputation, and his freedom, was teetering on the brink of collapse. In that moment, the weight of his actions, the monstrous extent of his lies, was too much for him to bear. Fear, anger, and desperation consumed him. He could feel his world unraveling, the once immaculate life he had carefully built slipping through his fingers. As the argument grew more heated, Emily's words became sharp, cutting deeper than ever. She made it clear that nothing would stop her from bringing him down. You're going to pay for what you've done, Andrew. I'll make sure of it, she spat, her eyes filled with disgust and betrayal. It was the last straw for him. In a panic, Andrew turned to his medical bag, his hand trembling as he fumbled through the sterile tools he used every day in his operating room. His eyes landed on a syringe filled with a potent sedative, something he often used to calm patients before surgery. In his mind, it was a simple solution: inject Emily, make her unconscious, and by the time she woke up, he would have had time to figure out a plan. He could calm her down, make her forget the confrontation, by himself the time he so desperately needed. But Andrew miscalculated. The sedative, while designed for patients in good health, was not intended for someone like Emily. She had an underlying heart condition. A detail Andrew had long been unaware of, despite their years of marriage. As the needle pierced her skin, he never considered the risks, his mind clouded by panic and adrenaline. The sedative took hold quickly, but instead of drifting into unconsciousness, Emily's body reacted violently. Her heart struggled to process the dosage, and within moments, her breathing grew shallow, her face turning pale as her pulse slowed to a terrifying crawl. Andrew watched in horror as Emily's body failed to respond. Panic set in as he realized the truth: the dose was too much. He had killed her. It wasn't the plan. He never meant for this to happen. But there she was, lifeless in front of him, the woman he had loved, and betrayed, dead at his feet. The weight of his actions sent Andrew into a frenzy. His breath came in ragged gasps as his mind raced to think of a way out. The implications of her death were unbearable, and he knew there could be no trace of his involvement. In a state of sheer panic, Andrew began to stage the scene, desperate to cover his tracks and divert suspicion from himself. He dragged Emily's limp body to the bathroom, the location he believed would create the most plausible scenario for an accident. He positioned her in such a way that it appeared as if she had fallen, slipped on the tile, hit her head, and died in a tragic, but ultimately explainable accident. He carefully manipulated her position, ensuring that there were no signs of struggle, no indication that she had fought back, no proof of the confrontation that had just occurred. Next, he wiped down the syringe, the medical bag, and any surfaces that might have contained traces of the sedative. He disposed of the syringe, flushed it down the toilet to remove all evidence. His hands, now shaking violently, worked quickly to erase any signs of his involvement in the crime. He cleaned the bathroom, wiped down the door handles, and made sure there was nothing left that could point back to him. In his mind, the perfect crime was within his reach: Emily's death would be a tragic accident, and no one would ever know the truth. When he was finished, Andrew stood in the middle of the bathroom, looking down at Emily's lifeless form. His heart pounded in his chest, the realization of what he had done sinking in. He had killed his wife, the woman who had devoted her life to justice, to righting wrongs. And he had done it all to protect himself, to preserve the empire he had built on lies and deception. For a long moment, he simply stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of his actions. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of his own breathing. There would be no turning back now. The sudden death of Detective Emily Langston had left the town reeling. To the public, it seemed like a tragic accident, a woman slipping in the bathroom, striking her head in an unfortunate fall. But for those closest to Emily, the circumstances surrounding her death didn't add up. Emily's younger sister, Jenna, had always been close to her, sharing not only a bond of family but also a deep respect for her sister's career. When Emily died, Jenna's grief was compounded by a growing unease. At the funeral, Andrew Langston, once a picture of composure and calm, behaved in a way that set Jenna on edge. His apparent lack of visible emotion, his perfect control in the face of such tragedy, seemed out of place. Where others mourned openly, Andrew's demeanor struck Jenna as cold and rehearsed. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong, something hidden beneath the surface. After the funeral, Jenna went to Emily's home, hoping to find some comfort in her sister's belongings. As she sorted through Emily's personal effects, she stumbled upon a series of private notes, scribbled in her sister's unmistakable handwriting. The notes were scattered and fragmented, but they painted a troubling picture. Emily had been investigating a series of unusual deaths tied to the Langston Medical Foundation, deaths that aligned disturbingly with Andrew's line of work. Emily had even written about a black market organ trade and medical procedures that don't make sense, a chilling glimpse into what her sister had uncovered before her death. Jenna's heart raced as she pieced together the notes, realizing that her sister had been closer to exposing the truth than anyone had known. And yet, Emily had never mentioned anything about her findings. Had she suspected her own husband? What had she known? Jenna's suspicions grew when she reached out to Detective Nate Harris, Emily's longtime partner. Nate was equally troubled by the events surrounding Emily's death, and when Jenna shared the notes with him, he agreed to help her investigate further. Together, they began digging into Emily's case files and personal belongings. The breakthrough came when they gained access to Emily's laptop, an encrypted device that Emily had always kept secure. But with Nate's help, Jenna was able to bypass the encryption and unlock the contents. Among the files, they found a trove of disturbing evidence, confidential documents, a list of names, and most damning of all, an encrypted folder filled with emails and records tied directly to Andrew Langston. The documents outlined his involvement in the organ harvesting ring, as well as a network of wealthy buyers and victims who had been left in the wake of his operation. Emily had clearly been on the brink of exposing everything, and it was these files that had ultimately cost her life. A forensic report soon confirmed their suspicions. Toxicology tests showed that Emily had traces of sedative in her system, a drug Andrew had frequently used during surgeries. The sedative found in her blood was a precise match to a substance that had been traced back to Andrew's medical supply. It wasn't just any drug. It was one Andrew had access to and had used on countless occasions to calm patients before surgery. But in Emily's case, the dose had been fatal. This wasn't an accident, it was murder. With this new evidence in hand, Jenna knew it was time to confront Andrew. She devised a plan to meet him, armed with everything she had uncovered. But she wasn't going to let him off the hook with empty words. Jenna decided to secretly record their conversation, knowing that Andrew's guilt would be written all over his face when he was confronted with the truth. The confrontation took place in Andrew's office, room he had once used as a sanctuary, a space that now felt like a prison to Jenna. She entered with a calm exterior, but inside, her heart was pounding. As she sat across from her brother-in-law, she could sense his unease. He was hyper-aware of her presence, his eyes darting nervously, and the usual confidence he once exuded seemed to have abandoned him. "Andrew," Jenna began, her voice steady, "I know what happened to Emily. And I know what you did." Andrew's face drained of color, his eyes flicking to the recorder hidden in Jenna's hand. He tried to maintain composure, but the cracks in his demeanor were impossible to ignore. He stammered for a moment, unable to find the words to deny what he knew was coming. I didn't mean to hurt her, Jenna," Andrew began, his voice wavering as the guilt began to surface. "It was an accident. I only meant to sedate her, to calm her down. She was getting too close to the truth. She was going to ruin everything, destroy everything I worked for." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Jenna saw the man she had once trusted crumble before her. "You killed her, Andrew," Jenna said, her voice laced with a cold fury. "You injected her with that sedative. You knew what would happen, and you did it anyway. You killed Emily to protect yourself and your empire." Andrew's shoulders slumped, his guilt palpable as the truth spilled from his lips. "I didn't want to hurt her, Jenna. I didn't want any of this. But I was scared. I couldn't let her destroy everything. I never thought it would go this far. Please, you have to believe me, it wasn't supposed to happen." Jenna felt her stomach churn as she listened to Andrew's confession. It wasn't remorse she heard in his voice, it was the admission of a man who had lost control, a man who had been willing to do whatever it took to protect the empire of lies he had built. As the conversation ended, Jenna quietly turned off the recorder, knowing that this moment would be the one that brought justice for Emily. The evidence was irrefutable now. Andrew Langston had killed his wife, and he would pay for the twisted web of deceit he had woven. The inevitable crash of Andrew Langston's carefully constructed empire came swiftly. The investigation that began with a quiet suspicion had snowballed into a public spectacle that would forever alter Montgomery. Once celebrated as a gifted surgeon and philanthropist, Andrew was now the focus of a criminal investigation that uncovered the deepest layers of corruption and deceit. Authorities, armed with irrefutable evidence, stormed Andrew's medical foundation in a coordinated raid, bringing to light a web of lies and illegal activities. Inside the foundation, investigators discovered a trove of hidden medical supplies, sedatives, surgical tools, and other materials that had been used in the organ harvesting operation. But the most damning discovery was in the financial records. These documents revealed a sprawling network of transactions, shell companies, and covert deals that linked Andrew directly to a global black market organ trade. The magnitude of his criminal activities was staggering. For years, Andrew had been supplying high-demand organs to wealthy buyers, all while presenting himself to the community as a philanthropist working for the greater good. It was during the raid that Andrew was arrested. Law enforcement found him in his office, alone and visibly disheveled, a shadow of the confident man who had once held the town in his grasp. As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the reality of his downfall hit him with brutal clarity. There was no escaping the consequences of his actions now. With his arrest came a quiet surrender. He knew that the walls had closed in around him, and there was no more room for lies. The confession that sealed his fate had come at the hands of Jenna Langston. Andrew's admission to Emily's murder, captured on tape, was the final piece of the puzzle. His guilt was no longer a matter of suspicion, it was a matter of record. With the confession, the law had the undeniable proof they needed to charge him with the brutal killing of his wife, Detective Emily Langston, as well as multiple counts of illegal medical practices, including conspiracy to traffic human organs. As the news of his arrest broke, Montgomery was left in a state of collective shock. The town that had once revered Andrew Langston as a pillar of the community was now faced with the horrifying truth: the man who had saved lives had also taken them. The revelation sent ripples through the community, with many feeling betrayed by the man they had trusted so deeply. Families who had once sought his help were left questioning their faith in the medical system, wondering if they had unknowingly been complicit in his crimes. In contrast, Emily's legacy as a dedicated detective was honored by the very people who had once looked up to her husband. The local police department held a memorial in her honor, with many of Emily's colleagues offering heartfelt tributes. Emily's work had not only exposed the horrifying truth about Andrew but had also ensured that justice would be served. Her family, including her sister Jenna, made sure that her memory lived on, not just as a victim but as a symbol of integrity and courage. As Andrew prepared for his trial, the town continued to reel from the shock of his exposure. His once charitable image had been obliterated, and his name was forever tarnished. No longer would he be remembered for his philanthropic efforts or medical prowess. Instead, he would be known as the man who betrayed everything he claimed to stand for, who chose greed and self-preservation over love and loyalty. The trial began with Andrew's defense team attempting to paint him as a victim of circumstances, a man driven to desperate measures by his fear of losing everything. They argued that his actions, including the murder of Emily, were not premeditated but were instead the result of an emotional breakdown and the pressure of maintaining his facade. The defense attempted to portray Andrew as a man who had been consumed by guilt, suggesting that his involvement in the organ harvesting operation was a misguided attempt to save lives, albeit for the wrong reasons. However, the prosecution quickly dismantled this argument, presenting the overwhelming evidence against Andrew. The encrypted files found on Emily's laptop, the forensic evidence linking him to the sedative found in her system, and the damning confession to Jenna were enough to seal his fate. Andrew's attempts to deflect blame were futile in the face of the irrefutable facts. The trial captivated the town, and as the days wore on, it became clear that the evidence against Andrew was insurmountable. Witnesses, including medical professionals who had worked with Andrew, testified about his unauthorized procedures and questionable practices. The true scale of his crimes was revealed, showing that he had not only been responsible for the murder of his wife but also for the countless lives destroyed by his illegal organ trade. In the end, Andrew Langston was convicted on multiple charges, including the first-degree murder of his wife, Emily, and multiple counts of illegal medical practices. The jury deliberated for mere hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow as the gavel struck down, sealing Andrew's fate. His once promising life was over, and the man who had once been a hero to many would now spend the rest of his life in prison. For the Langston family, there was no true sense of closure. Emily's death had left an unfillable void, and no amount of justice could bring her back. But the conviction served as a reminder that even the most carefully crafted facades could crumble, and that the pursuit of truth, no matter how painful, was the only path to justice. This case isn't just a story of love and betrayal, it's a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the brightest smiles. Andrew Langston's empire of lies and Emily's tragic death reveal the cost of unchecked ambition and deception. What started as a seemingly perfect marriage and the story of a successful, respected couple slowly unraveled into a chilling tale of murder and criminal enterprise. As we reflect on Emily's investigation, her persistence in uncovering the truth ultimately led to the exposure of one of the most disturbing criminal operations in Montgomery's history. But it also came at a terrible cost. Her quest for justice, driven by an unshakable belief in the law, ultimately ended in her own untimely death at the hands of the man she trusted most. The tragedy of Emily's fate reminds us that even those who seem to be in positions of power or respect are not immune to the dangers of unchecked greed and corruption. In the end, the price of Andrew's lies was paid in full, but it was too late for Emily to witness the justice she worked so hard to bring about. Could Emily have uncovered the truth sooner? What would you have done in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story shocking, like this video and subscribe to True Crime Files HQ for more gripping tales of love, lies, and deadly secrets.